Now that I'm back in England through the magic of video editing, I'm going to show you around, starting with HMS Warrior. A 40-gun steam-powered armored frigate built as a response to the French ironclad Galore, HMS Warrior was the world's first armored-plated iron-hulled warship when she was launched in 1860. But it just looks like a normal frigate. I don't see any steam engines, I only see sails and rigging. And on the surface level, you are correct. Back then, steam engines didn't really have the range for fully independent operation, so whenever the ship was cruising, they just used sails. But whenever it was time for battle or they wanted to sail to one place not depending on the weather, they raised the collapsible smokestack and put the engine in operation, going as fast as 14 knots or 26 kilometers per hour. As for the hull design, they copied it from HMS Mercy, a large wooden frigate, only that they adapted it to make it out of iron instead of wood. This design resulted in the hull being actually lighter than the wooden one, giving more capacity for guns, armor, and engines. From this position next to the helm, you get a nice view of Portsmouth Harbour, and because the Dockyard is built next to a Royal Navy base, you get wonderful sights like this. Panning out now to a grey-docked warship, that is the Hatakaze-class guided missile destroyer JS Shibakaze, built for the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. Reclassified as the training vessel these days, with what deck activity it had, I was hoping to see it leave. Back now on the Warrior, this cutaway you see here is the Citadel Wall, essentially one giant thick iron box to protect most of its guns and its machinery, setting up a standard that is used in all other warships ever since. 4.5 inches of wrought iron backed by 18 inches of teak, the wood was used to absorb shocks from impact to prevent the bolts from shearing. The gun deck itself is equipped with 110-pounder breech-loading Armstrong guns and 68-pounder smoothbore muzzle-loading ones. Notice how every gun had a set of equipment assigned to it, while that gun's crew was stationed on a bench next to it when they, didn't have to fire the gun. Because boarding actions were still seen as a threat, racks of rifles, pistols, and sabers were within arm's reach of the crew. Down at the bottom, we end up in the boiler room, which due to poor lighting conditions you will see the footage a bit murky. Sorry about that. 10 of these rectangular boilers produced superheated steam which ended up in this here trunk engine, capable of almost 5,800 indicated horsepower, turning one shaft and propeller. This is what gave Warrior its 14-knot top speed. Now you would think that such a warship would have Spartan conditions on board, but at least in the officer's case, you would be surprised. Some of the higher-ranking ones had a comfortable bed in their own private cabin, with a nice little window to view the seaside, and also a massive table where they served all their meals, while the captain and his entourage lived in conditions that can be described as opulent. Desks, leather armchairs, couches, a shelf for books, even a fancy decorated heating element. Seeing these things made me think that a Victorian officer was more on a cruise ship than on a warship. Regardless, HMS Warrior served well as the pride of the Royal Navy, even though it was obsolescent 10 years later due to extremely rapid advancements in ship design. But before we move on with our historical tour, here is a shot of the most modern warship the Royal Navy has, the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier. And across that little pond you will find the current flag but permanently dry-docked ship of the Royal Navy, HMS Victory. Yes, you heard me correctly. This ship of the line, commissioned in 1778, serves as the current flagship of the First Sea Lord since October 2012, and it is the world's oldest naval ship still in commission, although probably it will never sail again. I didn't get a clear shot of the outside due to it undergoing a massive restoration effort, but one day I hope to return to film it. In the meantime, here is a picture of how it looked. The ship was classified as a first rate, carrying no less than 104 guns. It was fully rigged and capable of doing up to 11 knots. When I say it was fully rigged, it was. The masts are currently undergoing restoration and there is talks that they were going to replace them with fiberglass. Speaking of fiberglass, most of the guns you've seen in this video are made of them to put less strain on the hull. So here's a little game for when you're there. Knock on the cannons. If you hear them hollow, they're fiberglass. Try to find the iron ones. This deck here is armed with 32-pounder guns, and you saw that it wasn't too different from the ones on HMS Warrior, except for the spacing being much more cramped. I want you to notice that these cannons have a flintlock on top for firing. because running around with a burning wick on a wooden ship full of gunpowder is generally not a good idea. And because this ship was built quite a few years after the age of pirates, boarding was still common, therefore muskets and cutlasses within arm's reach was a must. The middle deck came equipped with 24-pounder guns, while the upper deck and the top you saw where the masts were supposed to be came equipped with even lighter 12-pounder guns. This specific arrangement of guns was done in order to have as low of a center of gravity as possible, because that is how shipbuilding works. To help with that, at the bottom of the ship they stored the sailors' ration of rum, alongside rocks for added ballast. Because shipbuilding was rather limited by the materials and technologies available back then, most of the sailors aboard Victory spent their time next to the guns they were supposed to be manning, in, as you can see, very cramped conditions. The same cannot be said about admirals and captains. They had ample space of movement in their cabins. And while they had a few luxuries, it was not the same as boarding the cruise ship Warrior. Times were much simpler back then, including the food, which consisted mostly of dried meat, cheese, and ship's biscuit, which makes current Panzerplatten look like a joke. They also had a fireplace to cook food, and some say it was used to make heated shot for cannons. But as you all know, running around with a red-hot iron ball on a wooden ship full of gunpowder is not generally a good idea. What was a good idea, though, was the planning done on this table by one Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson. It would be known as the Battle of Trafalgar, Britain's finest hour at that time. Charging from the side a numerically superior Spanish and French battle line, the devastating raking broadsides launched by Nelson's fleet decimated the French-Spanish forces, capturing 21 ships of the line with minimal losses for the Royal Navy. But one loss would offset this great moment. Victory led the charge and locked masts with the French Redoutable, and in the general melee that ensued, Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson was struck by a musketeer firing from the mizzen-top of the French ship. He would die 3 hours later aboard the HMS Victory. There are markers placed on the ship where he was shot and where he died. I forgot to film them. Moving on with the video, and back in history, I present to you the wreck of the Mary Rose, a Carrack-type warship from the Tudor period. The half that you see here survived as it was buried under mud. The other one simply rotted away. It is now kept in an environmentally sealed atmosphere to prevent further degradation. The circumstances of its sinking are debatable even to this very day, but it is generally accepted that during the Battle of the Solent in 1545, the ship fired its broadside against the French naval forces, then swerved to fire the other side. But an unexpected combination of a gust of wind, open gun ports on the lower decks, and a rebuild by adding more guns, making the ship inherently more unstable, led to the water flooding through those gun ports, quickly sinking the ship. Rediscovered in 1971, it would take a titanic effort, royal family funding, and 11 years for the wreck to be raised to be preserved in the state we see it today. As a side note, history never repeats but often rhymes. The Swedish ship Vasa sinking due to a similar set of circumstances. One day I will get to this one as well. Back to the Mary Rose, the rediscovery of the wreck also led to a treasure trove of Tudor period artifacts, ranging from instruments, plates, jugs, cutlery, golden coins, all the way to the cannons used on the Mary Rose. They were a selection of bronze castings or banded iron of various shapes, sizes, and calibers. Back then, there wasn't such a thing as a unified main battery. Each foundry was producing a different kind of cannon. Because it took so long to produce one, they just had to make do with whatever was available at the time. Some of these designs were actually very clever, including this one, which is an early attempt of a breech loader. It didn't work out that well because they haven't mastered the technology just yet. In the end, the guns on the Mary Rose were mostly a novelty. Difficulties with gunpowder, accuracy issues, and a general lack of tactics led to them being mostly ineffective. Boarding was still the primary tactic of conquering a ship in the 16th century. Longbows, pikes, bills, halberds, it all came down to how quickly you can beat the enemy into submission. Nevertheless, the Mary Rose served as an important stepping stone on how to build a blue water navy, and it also offers a fantastic glimpse of the Tudor period. I hope you enjoyed this little tour of the most important attractions in the Portsmouth Historic Dockyard. Coming up is London. Until next time.